I'm Michael Morrison. I'm 35, and I shut down my own brother's wedding right in the middle of the ceremony by making a single phone call. Before I tell you how the lights went out on $1 million wedding and exposed a lie that had poisoned my family for 2 decades, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's a wild story, and I'm glad you're here to listen. It all started in darkness. Not the gentle, romantic darkness of a slow dance, but a sudden, violent, and absolute void. One moment, the air was filled with the rich, soaring notes of a string quartet, a sound so expensive it probably had its own agent. The next, there was nothing. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the 200 guests, a quiet so profound it felt like a physical weight. I saw the lead violinist, a man with a perfectly coiffed silver mane, tap his microphone with a bewildered expression. A hollow thump-thump echoed slightly, then died. He looked at his fellow musicians. They just stared back, their bows frozen over their instruments. Then the world ended. The dozen massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the silk-draped ceiling of the main tent blinked once, twice, and went out. Every single light on the sprawling grounds of Willowbrook Estate, the fairy lights woven into the ancient oaks, the elegant uplighting on the main house, the spotlights illuminating the altar, vanished in an instant. We were plunged into a blackness so complete it felt like being at the bottom of the ocean. A collective gasp sucked the remaining air out of the tent. It was followed by a wave of confused murmurs, which quickly escalated into panic chatter. A baby, startled from its sleep, began to wail, a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the nervous energy. And then, above it all, a single high-pitched scream of pure, undiluted rage and disbelief. It was Belle, my brother's bride, a silhouette of white lace against the dying light. The emergency lights, set low to the ground, flickered on a few seconds later. They didn't illuminate. They distorted, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced like demons. They bathed the scene in a sickly, jaundiced yellow, making everyone look pale and ill. You could see the panic etched onto faces, the frantic searching for answers. My father, Robert, ever the man of action, was on his feet, his voice booming. "Victoria, what in God's name is going on? Get the generator running." My mother, Eleanor, clung to his arm, her carefully constructed mask of society hostess crumbling into genuine horror. My brother, Ethan, the golden boy, the groom, just stood at the altar, blinking like a startled deer, utterly useless. But I didn't move. I remained perfectly still in my cheap folding chair in the back row, the one they'd so thoughtfully provided when they ran out of room in the family section. And as the chaos swirled around me, a strange, profound sense of peace settled deep in my bones. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry anymore, because I was the only person in that entire chaotic mess who knew this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a glitch. This was a consequence. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a silent vibration against my leg. I didn't need to look at it. I knew it was Francis, my assistant, confirming that the final directive had been executed. As everyone else wondered if a storm had knocked out a transformer or if the staff had made a colossal error, I was thinking about a video call I'd had with my lawyer 6 weeks ago. I was thinking about the cold, hard resolve that had settled in my heart. Because this story doesn't begin with a power outage. It begins with years of quiet erasure, of being treated like a ghost in my own family. It begins with one final, crushing act of disrespect that became the catalyst for a meticulously prepared response. It's the story of how a family's harmless, trust fund brother finally decided to show everyone that he wasn't just a guest at the party. He owned the venue, the caterer, the band, and the very ground they stood on. And tonight, the rent was due. To understand the why of that night, you have to understand the what. The what was my family, the Morrisons of Willowbrook. From the outside, we were the American dream steeped in old-world class. A sprawling 100-acre vineyard in the heart of wine country. A family name that opened doors, a legacy of success. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, were masters of this image. They chaired galas, sat on boards, and were the very picture of philanthropic grace. Their son, my younger brother Ethan, was their crowning achievement. He was blessed with my father's looks and my mother's social charm. He glided through life on a current of goodwill, always seeming to land on his feet after every stumble, blissfully unaware of the vast, invisible safety net beneath him. And then there was me, Michael, the older son, the spare, the quiet, awkward one who preferred books to parties and balance sheets to polo matches. The disappointment. They never used that word, of course. My parents were too polished for such crude honesty. But their disappointment was a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life. It was in the way my father's eyes would glaze over when I tried to talk about my work. It was in the way my mother would change the subject whenever a friend asked what I did for a living. While Ethan was being groomed to inherit the family legacy. A legacy that was, in reality, crumbling under the weight of his own incompetence. I had moved to the city and done the one thing no one expected. I built something. I started a private equity firm, Atlas Holdings, out of a shoebox apartment with a second-hand laptop and a stomach full of ambition. The early years were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I ate ramen noodles and slept on my office couch. I poured every ounce of my being into it, and I succeeded, beyond anyone's wildest dreams. I turned that scrappy startup into a $50 million enterprise. But to my family, my success was an inconvenient truth. It didn't fit their narrative, so they ignored it. In their carefully curated reality, I was still just Michael, the eccentric older brother who was living off the modest trust fund grandpa left. It was a fiction they all agreed upon because it kept the family hierarchy intact. Ethan the prince and me the court jester. The bitter irony was that I, the jester, was secretly the king. I was the safety net. I was the silent, invisible benefactor keeping their entire fantasy world from imploding. The breaking point, the moment the deep, tectonic plates of my resentment finally shifted, came 6 months before the wedding. I was in the middle of a tense negotiation in my boardroom when my private line rang. It was my father. His voice, usually so full of blustering confidence, was thin and strained. "Michael, we have a problem. A serious problem." I excused myself from the meeting. "What is it, Dad?" "It's the vineyard," he said, his voice cracking. "The bank, they're calling the loan. We're going to lose everything." I closed my eyes. I knew this was coming. Ethan, in a bid to diversify, had convinced my father to invest heavily in some speculative tech startup that went belly up. They had leveraged Willowbrook to get the capital. And now the bill was due. They were on the verge of foreclosure, of losing the very symbol of our family's identity. The old me, the dutiful son, would have lectured. The angry part of me wanted to scream, "I told you not to trust him with that kind of money." But the CEO in me just asked, "How much?" "3 million, he whispered. "We need 3 million by the end of the month." I didn't sigh. I didn't hesitate. I just said, "I'll handle it." I didn't tell him how. I didn't tell him that I would instruct my legal team to form a new shell corporation, Northwood Holdings, to purchase the entire debt portfolio from the bank. I didn't tell him that, effective the following Tuesday, I would become the primary and sole lien holder on Willowbrook Estate. I didn't tell him that I now, quite literally, owned our family home. I just solved the problem silently as I always did. 2 days after the wire transfer went through, my mother posted a photo on her Instagram. It was a sun-drenched picture of her, my father and Ethan, all grinning, clinking champagne glasses on the veranda. The caption was a knife in my gut. It read, "So incredibly proud of my boys for weathering the storm. It wasn't easy, but true Morrison grit always prevails in the end. Hashtag family strong, hashtag blessed." They didn't even call me. Not a text. Not an email. Not a single word of thanks. They had written me out of my own heroic act. In that moment, sitting in my cold, glass-walled office, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. It was a strange, cold clarity. A quiet resolve. The relationship I thought I had with my family was a lie, and I was done pretending. So, when the wedding invitation arrived 6 weeks before the big day, I wasn't hurt. I was ready. It was a flimsy, cheap thing, the kind you buy in a pack of 50. The postmark showed it had been mailed only 2 days prior, long after the embossed, calligraphed invitations had gone out to their real friends. My assistant, Francis, placed it on my polished desk as if it were contaminated. Francis was a 60-year-old retired Marine, built like a fire hydrant and fiercely loyal. He was the only person on Earth who knew the full truth of my family's finances. He kept the secret books, tracking every loan, every gift, every bailout. He eyed the invitation. A bit late, isn't it? Sir, with all due respect, you can't possibly be considering going. I have to, Francis, I said, my voice even. I leaned back, looking out at the city skyline. This is the final piece of data I need. Data? He looked confused. It's an insult. It's more than that, I explained. It's confirmation. For years, I've been operating on the hope that one day they'll see me. That one day they'll appreciate what I do. That's a bad business model, Francis. Hope is not a strategy. I'm going to this wedding to conduct a final audit. I need to see it all one last time with my own eyes. I need to witness the full extent of the rot, so that when I finally walk away, there won't be a single shred of doubt or regret. Francis, the old soldier, understood the language of strategy. He nodded slowly. A reconnaissance mission, then, to confirm the enemy's position before you withdraw. Exactly. The following day, I arranged a video conference with Mark, my personal lawyer. Mark was a shark in a $1,000 suit, a man who lived for the fine print. Mark, I started, I need you to prepare a dossier, a comprehensive file on a confidential matter. I'm listening, he said, his face impassive on the screen. I want a complete, documented history of all my financial support for the Morrison family estate and its related entities over the past 10 years. I want it all. The vineyard bailout, the forgiven business loans for my brother, the funds to cover my father's bad stock market bets. I want deeds, stock certificates, bank statements. It needs to culminate in a clear, unequivocal summary stating my majority ownership, 72%, to be exact, of all family assets, including Willowbrook. Mark's eyebrow twitched, the only sign of his surprise. That's a significant position, Michael. What's the objective? The objective is clarity, I said. I want the information presented in a way that is impossible to misunderstand. Simple language, clear charts. I want it professionally bound in 10 presentation folders. Make them red. Red, he repeated, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. A power color. And what should we call this dossier? Title it, The Morrison Family Comprehensive Financial Review. Consider it done, Mark said. I hope you won't need it. So do I, Mark, I replied. So do I. The drive to Willowbrook a few weeks later was surreal. Every landmark sparked a memory, but the memories were now tainted. The old oak tree we used to climb now just looked like a taxable asset. The rolling vineyards weren't a symbol of home. They were collateral. I remembered one Thanksgiving. I must have been 12. I had spent a month building a detailed model rocket, complete with a 2-stage launch system. I was so proud of it. I gave it to my father as a gift. He glanced at it, said, "That's neat, son," and put it aside. A few minutes later, Ethan gave him a bottle of expensive scotch he'd had our housekeeper buy for him. My father beamed, patting Ethan on the back. "Now that's a gift. You've got class, son." I had spent my whole life trying to show them my rocket ship, while they only had eyes for the scotch. Pulling up the long gravel driveway, I saw the flurry of activity. The massive white tent, the army of caterers, the valet service. A king's wedding for a prince who had never earned a dime. I took a slow, centering breath the way my therapist had taught me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. I wasn't the wounded 12-year-old anymore. I wasn't the invisible son begging for a scrap of attention. I was Atlas. I was the one holding up their world. And I was about to shrug. I got out of the car, straightened the jacket of my custom-tailored suit, and walked toward the home I grew up in, a stranger with a briefcase full of dynamite. The cold front moved in the moment I stepped over the threshold. It wasn't a change in the weather, It was a change in the human climate. Maria, the head housekeeper, had been a warm, maternal figure for my entire childhood. She was the one who bandaged my scraped knees and snuck me cookies. When I walked into the grand foyer, she was arranging flowers on a console table. She saw me, and for a fleeting second, her face lit up with that old, familiar warmth. Then it vanished, replaced by a tight, professional mask. "Mr. Michael," she said, her voice stiff, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "Welcome. It's good to see you, Maria," I said, trying to bridge the sudden chasm between us. "How are the grandkids?" "They are well, thank you," she replied, turning her back to me to fuss with a rose. "If you'll excuse me, I have much to prepare." She hurried off down the hall without another word. It was a clear, brutal dismissal. The staff had been briefed. I was no longer family. I was other. The welcome brunch on the veranda was a masterclass in passive aggression. I found my mother holding court, a champagne flute in her hand, radiating socialite charm. She was telling an animated story to the Hamiltons, wealthy neighbors who owned the adjoining horse farm. When she finally noticed me hovering at the edge of her circle, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, Michael, there you are," she said, her tone suggesting my arrival was a minor but necessary inconvenience. She gestured vaguely in my direction. "Charles, Cynthia, you remember my older son, Michael." "Of course," Charles Hamilton boomed, giving me a friendly but vacant look. "Good to see you, son. What are you up to these days?" It was the question my mother dreaded. I opened my mouth to answer, but Eleanor cut me off with a light, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Michael is a free spirit," she announced to the group. "He's been living a simple life in the city, enjoying the trust fund my father so generously left him. We're just so happy he could pull himself away from his hobbies to be here for his brother's big day." The air thickened with pity. The Hamiltons gave me that specific, sympathetic smile reserved for lost causes and rescue pets. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, but I pushed it down. I just smiled back, a calm, empty smile. "It's a beautiful day for a wedding, isn't it?" I said, my voice even. Audit item number 1. Public emasculation and misrepresentation. Duly noted. I spent the next hour as a ghost at the feast, drifting between conversations, an invisible man in a $1,000 suit. The words floated around me, snippets of the family narrative they had all agreed upon. "No, I don't think he's seeing anyone," my Aunt Vivian confided to another cousin. "It's hard when you don't have a real career promotion to offer. A man needs ambition." Vivian was a retired judge, a woman I respected, but even she had bought into the lie. "I heard he tried to start some kind of business years ago, but it never went anywhere," my Uncle David added. This was the same Uncle David whose son's college fund I had personally guaranteed when David's own business had failed. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Each comment was a small, precise incision. By the time the sun began to set, I was covered in 1,000 tiny cuts. The rehearsal dinner that evening was designed for maximum humiliation. It was an extravagant affair under a canopy of stars, with long, beautifully decorated tables. A calligrapher had penned the name cards. I searched for mine at the main family table, already knowing what I would find. Robert, Eleanor, Ethan, Belle, Belle's parents, Great Aunt Eloise. No Michael. I scanned the other tables, my eyes tracing the elegant script. My name was nowhere. It was as if I didn't exist. Just as a cold knot of certainty formed in my stomach, Victoria, the wedding planner, intercepted me. Her face was a mask of strained efficiency. "Ah, Mr. Morrison," she said, tapping her clipboard. "We've had a last-minute seating adjustment. So sorry for the confusion. The family table was just so full." Her apology was as empty as her eyes. "I understand completely," I said. "Where would you like me to sit?" "We've arranged a spot for you right over here," she said, leading me away from the warmth and laughter of the main tables. She stopped near the service entrance, where the catering staff were bustling in and out. There, at the very end of a table filled with distant third-tier cousins, was a single, solitary metal folding chair. It was an afterthought, a deliberate insult. I looked at the sad little chair, then at Victoria. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you, Victoria. This is perfect." I pulled out the chair and sat down, my back to most of the party. She had expected a scene, an argument. My quiet compliance seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst could have. Audit item number 2. Calculated segregation. Confirmed. The final, definitive confirmation of my status came from the one person I had hoped, foolishly, might be an ally. James and I had been blood brothers at age 10. We grew up in each other's houses. He had spent countless nights at Willowbrook, had seen firsthand the blatant favoritism, the casual cruelty. He knew the truth. But James had always been a social chameleon, and when Ethan became the gravitational center of our high school social scene, James had slowly, inexorably, been pulled into his orbit. Now, as Ethan's best man, his transformation was complete. I found him at the open bar, holding court with the other groomsmen, all of them laughing loudly. I decided to make one last attempt. "James," I said, walking up to the group, "it's good to see you." He turned and our eyes met. For a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of something real. A memory of long summer afternoons and shared secrets. Then it was extinguished, replaced by the cool, guarded expression of a man protecting his social standing. "Mike," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Hey, you made it." He clapped me on the shoulder, a hollow, performative gesture. "Guys, this is Mike, Ethan's brother." He didn't say my brother. He said Ethan's brother. He defined me by my relationship to the man in the spotlight. "How's your mom?" I asked, trying to find common ground. "Is she still running that little antique shop?" Yeah, she's good," he said quickly, his eyes already darting back to his friends, terrified of being drawn into a real conversation with me. "Listen, we were just talking about the bachelor party. Catch you later, okay?" He turned his back on me, seamlessly rejoining the laughter, leaving me standing on the edge of the circle like a supplicant. It was a public shunning. The pain of it was sharp and specific. I walked away, the laughter of the groomsmen following me. As I passed a cluster of hedges, I heard James's voice again, lower this time, speaking to one of the others who had looked after me with a shred of curiosity. "Don't worry about it," James said with a dismissive chuckle. "It's just Mike. He's used to it." And that was it. That was the sound of the final lock clicking into place. He's used to it. They had normalized their cruelty. They had decided for me that my role was to be the quiet, accommodating ghost, the family footnote. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just a vast, cold emptiness. The audit was over. All data had been collected and collated. The hypothesis was confirmed. I walked out into the vineyard, the cool night air a welcome relief. I pulled out my phone, the screen casting a pale blue light on my face. My hands were perfectly steady. My mind was a steel trap. I found my message thread with Francis. I typed 3 simple words. The 3 most liberating words of my life. Confirm. Proceed as planned. I hit send. A declaration of independence. A declaration of war. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. A perfect California day. From the outside, Willowbrook was a picture of idyllic celebration. The staff buzzed with an air of controlled chaos. Florists put the finishing touches on magnificent arches of white roses, and the catering team prepped for a feast fit for royalty. It was a flawless production. But I was the producer, and I knew the script had a twist ending they hadn't read. I sequestered myself in my guest room, a small, sterile chamber in the far wing of the house. I ignored the cheerful knocks on the door, the calls to join the pre-wedding festivities. I didn't want to be part of their performance. I sat in an armchair by the window, my phone on the table beside me, and I waited. The silence was my sanctuary. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID simply said, "Francis." I answered on the first ring. "Talk to me." "The final audit is confirmed, Michael," Francis said. His voice was grim, all business. This wasn't a sudden discovery. It was the formal presentation of a quiet, internal investigation my firm's compliance department had been running for weeks. The initial red flags had been subtle, unusual cash flow patterns in the family trust account. Now we had the full picture. "Walk me through it," I said, my voice low and steady. "It's a masterclass in parasitic fraud, sir," Francis began. "Belle's father, Marcus Fairfield, is a much more sophisticated predator than we initially assumed. His property development company has been functionally insolvent for 3 years. He's been living on fumes. He saw your family not just as a meal ticket, but as an entire grocery store." Francis laid out the scheme with cold precision. Marcus had created 2 shell corporations, both with impressive, legitimate-sounding names: Fairfield Prestige Properties and Pinnacle Group Investments. He then approached Ethan with a once-in-a-lifetime real estate opportunity, a chance for Ethan to finally step out of my shadow and become a player. He had drafted a series of convoluted partnership agreements, naming Ethan as a key director. Ethan, blinded by his desperation to prove himself and his infatuation with Belle, signed every page without consulting a lawyer. He thought he was becoming a tycoon. In reality, he was becoming a patsy. "The fine print was the kill switch," Francis continued. "It gave Marcus's companies unilateral authority to draw from a $20 million line of credit. And that line of credit, Michael, was secured against Atlas Subsidiary Fund 7, the fund you established to manage the family assets. The fund they all call Grandpa's Trust." A cold fire burned in my gut. They had taken my generosity, my silent protection, and twisted it into a weapon against me. "How much damage?" I asked. "As of this morning's report, they've drawn down $4.3 million, Francis stated. "We've traced the expenditures. A $200,000 payment to this wedding planner, $150,000 to the caterer, $80,000 for Belle's wardrobe, 2 new luxury cars for Marcus and his wife, a $500,000 down payment on a beach house in Naples, Florida. They weren't just funding a wedding, Michael. They were funding a whole new life on your dime. And Ethan was the one who left the vault wide open." The word hung in the air between us. Fraud. This had escalated far beyond family disrespect. This was a federal crime. My own brother, through his willful ignorance and staggering incompetence, was an accomplice. "Thank you, Francis," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You've given me everything I need." I ended the call. For a long moment, I just stared out the window at the perfect, sun-drenched day. My decision was no longer just about emotion. It was a business decision, a risk management strategy. I had a fiduciary duty to my company and my investors to stop the bleeding. I picked up the phone again and dialed the private line of my banker, David Davies at First National. Davies was a man who understood power, discretion, and the importance of following instructions to the letter. He had already been given a preliminary briefing. "Mr. Davies," I said, foregoing any pleasantries. "Michael Morrison. This call is being recorded for quality assurance. I am calling to confirm my formal directive regarding the Fairfield Holdings line of credit, account number ending in 774. "I have the file in front of me, Michael," Davies replied, his voice a calm baritone. "I'm ready to proceed. The directive is as follows. You will honor all payments, charges, and drafts from that account until exactly 2,100 hours this evening, Pacific Standard Time. At 9 p.m. and 1 second, that line of credit is to be frozen. I want a hard freeze. All subsequent transaction attempts, regardless of size or origin, are to be declined for reason of insufficient funds. Is that directive clear and unambiguous?" "Crystal clear, Michael," he confirmed. "The instructions will be executed precisely as you have stated." "Thank you, David." I hung up. The first charge was set. Then, I opened my laptop and logged into my company's master administrative portal. With a few clicks, I navigated to the automated payment schedule. I found the utility provider for the Willowbrook Estate account. The monthly electricity bill, a hefty 5-figure sum thanks to the vineyard's irrigation systems, was scheduled for auto payment today. For the past 2 years, since I'd taken over the debt, My company had paid it like clockwork. I looked at the line item. I moved my cursor over the Cancel Future Payments button. I clicked it. A small box popped up, a final safeguard. Warning. Canceling this payment may result in service interruption. I clicked Confirm. The second charge was set. The rest of the day passed in a strange, detached haze. I put on my custom-made suit, a dark gray armor. I walked down to the garden ceremony. The scene was surreal. I saw my mother adjusting Ethan's bow tie, her face glowing with pride. I saw my father sharing a hearty laugh and a cigar with Marcus Fairfield, completely oblivious that the man he was bonding with was actively gutting his family's finances. Two patriarchs on a stage, one a king and one a con man. I found my metal folding chair in the back, my designated throne of irrelevance. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the whole charade. I saw my cousin Sarah, the quiet nurse. She gave me a small, worried smile. I had called her that morning and asked her to do one small thing for me later that evening. She had agreed without question. She was a good person trapped in a family of users. The ceremony began. The music swelled. The officiant began to speak in lofty tones about love, trust, and the sacred bonds of family. The hypocrisy was so thick it was almost comical. Belle, in a dress that cost more than the average American's annual salary, looked like a princess. Ethan, the handsome prince, looked proud and nervous. They were the stars of a production they didn't know I was directing. I glanced at my watch. 8:55 p.m. 5 minutes left on the clock. My heart began to beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. A countdown. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about accountability. It was about forcing a group of willfully blind people to see the light by first plunging them into darkness. The officiant smiled warmly. And now, Ethan and Belle will share the vows they have written for each other. I looked at my watch again. 8:59. The curtain was about to fall. The collapse didn't begin with a thunderclap. It began with the subtle, frantic hiss of a panicked whisper. Just as Belle parted her lips to begin her vows, her eyes shining with rehearsed emotion, I saw Victoria, the wedding planner, stiffen near the edge of the tent. Her hand flew to her earpiece, her perfectly lipsticked mouth moving in a silent, furious tirade. Her eyes darted towards the sprawling catering tent. I knew with absolute certainty what was happening. The final installment for the catering, a sum well into the six figures, scheduled to be charged at precisely 9 p.m., had just been emphatically declined. A moment later, the head chef, a large, intimidating man in a white coat, stormed out of the catering tent and made a beeline for Victoria. Their whispered argument escalated quickly. His face was red, hers was white. Guests in the first few rows began to stir, their perfect smiles faltering as they sensed the disturbance in the force. Then the second charge detonated. The string quartet, which had been playing a soft, romantic underscore, fell silent. Mid-note, the lead violinist looked down at his sheet music, then at his fellow musicians, his expression one of pure confusion. The sound technician, a young guy with headphones around his neck, was frantically checking his board. He threw his hands up in a gesture of helpless surrender. Their final payment, the one that triggered the second half of their performance contract, had failed to materialize. No pay, no play. The music was officially dead. A deeply awkward silence fell over the 200 guests. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. The officiant, a hired professional trying desperately to salvage the moment, cleared his throat. "Love," he began, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet, "is a bond that can weather any storm, any, technical difficulty." He never got to finish his platitude. That's when the main breaker blew. The lights didn't just go out. They were assassinated. With a visceral thunk that seemed to shake the very ground, every single watt of electricity on the estate was cut off. The magnificent chandeliers, the romantic string lights, the theatrical spotlights, all extinguished. The world vanished into a profound, terrifying blackness. The sound that followed was primal. A single, unified gasp from 200 people, followed by a tidal wave of panic. Murmurs turned to shouts. Cries of what happened, and is everyone okay, filled the air. And then, cutting through it all, was Belle's scream. A raw, animal sound of a dream being murdered. The emergency lights on the ground flickered to life, bathing the scene in their eerie, yellow-green glow. It was no longer a wedding. It was the set of a horror movie. Guests were on their feet, stumbling in the half-light. My father was bellowing for Victoria. My mother was clutching his arm, her face a paper-white mask of terror. And in the eye of the hurricane, I sat. I was the calm center, the quiet observer. I felt the chaos wash over me, but not touch me. Belle was having a complete meltdown. Her carefully constructed composure had shattered into a million pieces. "This can't be happening," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "My wedding, my perfect wedding is ruined." Her wild, panicked eyes scanned the crowd, looking for someone to blame. And they landed on me. She saw me sitting there perfectly still in my cheap folding chair. The one still point in her spinning world of disaster. In her unraveling mind, my calm must have looked like guilt. She stomped towards me, her Vera Wang gown getting tangled around her ankles. She was still clutching a tray of half-empty champagne flutes, a bizarre relic from a party that had died moments ago. She thrust the tray at my chest, rattling the glasses. "Don't you just sit there," she screeched, her face contorted with fury. "Do something useful for once in your life. Maybe you can help clean up." It was perfect, the ultimate irony. Even as her world collapsed, her ingrained instinct was to see me as the help. I looked up at her, my expression unreadable. I took the tray from her trembling hands, my movements slow and deliberate. I carefully placed it on the empty seat beside me. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the surrounding chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. "I think the professional staff has it handled, Belle," I said. "Or they would have if their paychecks had cleared." I then looked past her and met the eyes of my cousin Sarah. She had been standing nearby, watching the entire exchange with a look of dawning comprehension. I gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Sarah, a quiet nurse in her daily life, moved with the focused grace of a field medic. She walked to a discreet bench where she had left her tote bag. From it, she pulled out 10 thick, crimson-red folders. She moved silently through the stunned family members, who were clustered together like shipwreck survivors. She handed a folder to my father, one to my mother, one to my great-aunt Eloise, one to Marcus and his wife, one to Aunt Vivian and Uncle David. Finally, she walked up to my brother, Ethan, and placed the last folder in his hands. The only sound in the ruined tent was the rustle of 200 people trying to be quiet and the collective crinkle of cardstock as the folders were opened. In the dim light, I saw the glow of a dozen phone flashlights flick on, illuminating the first page. The title was stark and bold: The Morrison Family Comprehensive Financial Review. My father's face, already pale, went completely slack. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her gasp audible even from 20 feet away. It was Aunt Vivian, the retired judge, who broke the spell. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, but it carried the weight of a courtroom gavel. She was staring at the documents, her face a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Michael," she said, her head snapping up to look at me. This can't be real. These papers, they say you hold the title to Willowbrook. Free and clear. It says here you own, my God, 72% of the consolidated family assets. A new wave of shock, deeper and more profound than the blackout, silenced the entire gathering. Every single person turned to stare at me. The ghost in the machine had just stepped out of the shadows. Ethan looked down at his own folder, then back at me, his face a canvas of utter confusion. "Mike, what is she talking about? What is this nonsense?" Before I could reply, Marcus Fairfield found his voice. It was a roar of pure, desperate rage. "This is absurd. Pathetic, jealous fantasy. You're trying to destroy my daughter's wedding out of spite." I finally rose from my folding chair. I walked towards them, my steps slow and measured. The balance of power in the room had shifted so fundamentally it felt like the laws of gravity had been rewritten. "Destroy it," I said, my voice resonating with a cold, quiet authority I hadn't realized I possessed. "How can I destroy something that I paid for?" I stopped directly in front of Belle, whose face had morphed from anger to utter bewilderment. "I didn't ruin your wedding, Belle," I said, locking her eyes with mine. "I just stopped paying for it." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of confusion or shock. It was the silence of comprehension. The sound of 100 different puzzle pieces snapping into place in 100 different minds at once. The trust fund brother, the family footnote, the man in the folding chair, was the patriarch. Belle's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. The truth was too big, too world-altering for her to process. "Stopped paying?" she finally managed to stammer. "That's ridiculous. My father paid for this. He told me he did." "Did he?" I said, my voice dangerously soft. I let my gaze drift from her to her father. Marcus Fairfield was visibly sweating now, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "Let's be specific, Marcus. Did you use your money? Or did you use the $4.3 million you siphoned from a line of credit secured against my company? A line of credit you obtained by committing fraud, using my own brother as your unwitting accomplice." Every word was a precision strike. I saw Ethan flinch, the color draining from his face. He turned to Marcus, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "A loan? What loan?" "Dad," he said, the word sounding foreign as he addressed his future father-in-law. "What is he talking about?" Marcus puffed out his chest, a desperate last-ditch effort at bravado. "This is slander. I won't stand here and listen to these outrageous lies. My lawyer will be hearing about this first thing Monday morning." "I would be disappointed if he didn't," I replied, my voice as cold as a banker's heart. "Because my lawyer, Mark, has already compiled a full and detailed brief on your activities. He has the incorporation documents for your shell companies. He has the bank statements showing the fund transfers. And most importantly, he has the partnership agreements you had Ethan sign, the ones that make him personally liable for the debt he unknowingly guaranteed. It's not slander when it's documented, Marcus. It's evidence. And I believe the district attorney will be very interested in seeing it." That was the kill shot, the mention of the DA. The bluster drained out of Marcus Fairfield in an instant, leaving behind a deflated, terrified old man. Belle's mother let out a strangled sob and clutched her husband's arm. The guests, realizing this was no longer a spectacle but the scene of a crime, began to retreat. They moved in quiet, awkward clusters, whispering furiously, their eyes darting between me and the Fairfield family. They were abandoning the sinking ship. In minutes, the manicured lawn, which had been a stage for $1 million celebration, was now just a debris field, occupied only by the key players in this tragedy. My father, Robert, had collapsed into a chair. The red folder lay open on his lap like a final judgment. His face was buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. My mother stood frozen beside him, her expression a toxic cocktail of shame, fury, and utter disbelief. She was mourning the death of her most cherished illusion. My work here was done. The truth, in all its brutal glory, was free. I turned to walk away. "Michael, wait." Ethan's voice was hoarse. He caught up to me at the edge of the vineyard, away from the prying eyes of what was left of the family. His face, in the dim moonlight, was a wreck. It was tear-streaked and hollowed out. "I don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "The vineyard? You own the vineyard?" "I own the debt," I corrected him gently. "Which, for all intents and purposes, means I own the vineyard. I saved it from foreclosure 6 months ago after your investment went bad." His eyes widened. He shook his head, as if trying to dislodge a piece of information his brain refused to accept. "But everything else? Aunt Vivian's shares, Uncle David's business, the inheritance? For the better part of a decade, Ethan, I have been the family's emergency fund, the silent investor, The reason you all got to keep playing the part of the wealthy Morrisons while the foundations of your world were crumbling. And for the better part of a decade, you have all collectively decided that I was worth less than the dirt on your shoes. I didn't know, he whispered, the words sounding pathetic even to my ears. Mike, I swear on my life, I did not know about the loans. He told me it was a formality, a chance to build something. I wanted, God, this is so stupid. I wanted to impress you. I wanted to finally do something that would make you see me as an equal. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. And in your attempt to impress me, you trusted a stranger and handed him the keys to my bank vault. He choked on a sob, a raw, ugly sound. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mike, for all of it. For every joke at your expense. For every time I stood by and let them dismiss you. I was a coward. I was weak and I was a coward. And I let you down. I looked at him, really looked at him. The golden boy, tarnished and broken. And I felt a surprising emotion bubble up past the anger and the hurt. It was pity. It's done now, Ethan, I said, my voice softer than I intended. There's no putting this back in the box. We are not who we thought we were. I'm not who you thought I was. And you, it turns out, are not who you thought you were either. That's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. I left him there, standing among the grapevines, a lost boy in the ruins of his own life. As I walked towards the parking area, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was my great-aunt Eloise, 82 years old, barely 5 feet tall. But she possessed more steel than any man in our family. She placed a surprisingly strong hand on my forearm, stopping me. Her eyes, bright and intelligent, bored into mine. That was a difficult but necessary act of war, she said, her voice clear and steady. They have been blind for a very long time, Michael. Sometimes, the only way to make willfully blind people see is to burn their house down. She patted my arm. Your grandfather, my brother, he saw the strength in you, even when you were a boy. He would have been immensely proud of the man you are today. Decisive, powerful, principled. Don't you ever let these fools make you feel small again. Her words were like a healing balm on a lifetime of wounds. It was the approval, the validation, I had spent my entire life seeking, and it came not from my parents, but from this tiny, fierce woman. I got in my car and drove down the long, gravel driveway of Willowbrook Estate. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me anymore. The 6 months that followed the non-wedding were a period of controlled demolition and careful reconstruction. My own. I didn't linger to gloat or to manage the fallout. I delegated that to Mark, my lawyer. I needed distance. I needed air. I sold my penthouse apartment in the city, with its views of other people's concrete towers, and bought a starkly modern house of glass and steel perched on a cliff in Big Sur. The only sound was the relentless, soothing roar of the Pacific Ocean. It was the sound of cleansing. The legal repercussions for the Fairfields were swift and brutal. Faced with the mountain of evidence Mark presented, Marcus Fairfield's legal team advised him to capitulate immediately. To avoid a public trial, criminal charges, and the very real possibility of prison, he signed a comprehensive settlement. He liquidated all his remaining assets, the pathetic remnants of his failed business, the Naples beach house, the luxury cars, and turned them over to a trust one had established. The funds were used to partially repay the debt he had accrued. Belle, horrified at the prospect of a life without endless credit, filed for an annulment so fast it probably gave Ethan whiplash. Their great love story, it turned out, had a price tag. With the old world being dismantled, I focused on building a new one. I poured my energy and a significant portion of my capital into the official launch of the Atlas Foundation. Our mission was simple: to fund and mentor brilliant, driven entrepreneurs who came from backgrounds where doors were usually closed. We weren't just writing checks, we were offering a partnership. Our first grant recipient was a young woman named Dr. Eris Thorne. She was a 26-year-old PhD from a state school who had developed a revolutionary biodegradable plastic alternative in her garage. She was brilliant, passionate, but every venture capital firm she'd pitched had dismissed her as too young or lacking business experience. They saw her as a risk. I saw her as a star. I flew to her small lab in Ohio. I spent 2 days with her, not as a benefactor, but as a student. I listened as she explained the science, her eyes blazing with passion. I helped her refine her business plan. I made calls to my contacts in manufacturing and distribution. The feeling was indescribable. It was a positive-sum game. Helping her succeed felt infinitely more rewarding than plugging the leaks in my family's sinking ship ever had. My own family attempted to reestablish contact. My mother's voicemails were a masterclass in emotional manipulation, swinging from tearful apologies to passive-aggressive guilt trips. My father's emails were long, rambling manifestos about his own regrets and how he'd always known I had it in me. It was all too little, far too late. I created a special folder in my email for their messages and instructed my assistant to screen their calls. The boundary was non-negotiable. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about self-preservation. Ethan's approach was starkly different. He called me once, 2 months after the wedding. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its former arrogance. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said. "I'm calling to tell you that I've enrolled in a night course for a business management certificate. And I got a job at a warehouse, loading trucks." I was silent, unsure how to respond. "I need to learn how to work," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to understand the value of a dollar that I earned myself. I need to build something, Michael, even if it's just a wall of boxes on a pallet. I need it to be mine." It was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. I was still cautious, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than pity or anger. "Keep me updated on your progress," I said, and left it at that. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an open door, a crack of light. The final, definitive chapter of the old world closed on a gray Tuesday in March. A courier delivered a thick, formal package from the lawyer handling great-aunt Eloise's estate. She had passed away peacefully at the age of 82, a month prior. Her funeral had been a small, private affair, and I had delivered a eulogy that celebrated her quiet strength. The package contained her last will and testament. As I read, my breath caught in my throat. Eloise, in her final act of matriarchal power, had completely re-engineered the family's financial landscape. She had set up a modest, carefully managed trust for Ethan, enough to ensure he would never be destitute but not enough to rescue him from the necessity of work. She left token amounts to my parents. But the bulk of her considerable estate, her vast portfolio of stocks and bonds, her controlling interest in 2 major corporations, her art collection, was left entirely to me. More than that, she had named me as the sole executor of her will and the successor trustee for all remaining family trusts. Tucked inside the legal document was a handwritten note on her personal stationery. Her handwriting was a frail but elegant script. "Michael, do not mistake this for a burden. It is a tool. Your grandfather built a kingdom, and your father nearly let it crumble. You have the strength and the vision to build an empire. Do not let sentiment or misplaced guilt cloud your judgment. Lead. You were born for it. And be happy. That is my final directive. With love, Eloise." I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer. It wasn't an inheritance of money. It was an inheritance of responsibility, of trust, of legacy. Eloise hadn't just given me her wealth. She had passed me the torch. It's remarkable how quiet life can become when you finally mute the voices that have been screaming at you your whole life. For years, I operated under the flawed premise that my success was a currency I could use to purchase respect from my family. I thought if I just closed one more deal, added another zero to my net worth, built a bigger company, they would eventually have no choice but to acknowledge me. I spent the better part of 2 decades trying to get an invitation to a party where I was never truly welcome. The night of the wedding wasn't a victory of wealth. It was a victory of clarity. The moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I truly became powerful. My worth was never in their hands to begin with. It was mine all along. Life now is measured in different metrics. Instead of stock prices, I measure it in the progress of the entrepreneurs my foundation supports. Instead of shareholder meetings, I have long walks on the beach with my dog, a rescue named Winston. My relationship with Ethan is a slow, careful reconstruction. We talk once a week. He tells me about his job, the difficult boss, the small satisfaction of a hard day's work. He's on a path to a promotion to shift supervisor. He's building himself, brick by painful brick. There is no easy reconciliation, but there's the emerging blueprint of a new kind of brotherhood. One founded on a harsh, shared reality rather than a gilded lie. My parents remain at a distance, figures in my past. I am cordial, but the door to my life and my bank account is firmly closed. I've taken up journaling, a way to process the long, complicated journey. Last night, I was thinking about that moment, the final, absurd insult of being handed that tray. I wrote a line that felt like closing a book and placing it on a high shelf, never to be opened again. They told me to help in the kitchen. What they didn't know is that I built the house. And now, I'm building a better one. And I am. Every single day. It's a quieter house with fewer rooms, but the foundation is solid. The walls are true, and the view is spectacular. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to be seen for who you really are? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.